We have Dead Cells skill tier list action. The most action-packed game, Firefox. Big thank you to everyone tuning in today. So for those who haven't seen this before, typically the way we do the tier list is we go top to bottom. But because this is split between turrets, grenades, and skills, well, powers is what they call it. What I usually do is I alternate between each one. We also have different categories. Of course, a tier list means that we're putting stuff in order from top to bottom. To show you all what we did last time, this is the 1.9 tier list right here. Everything prior to the distillery update, no DLC weapons, no Tesla coil, and the colors were still kind of different at the time. And now we are on version 2.1, and the 2.1 tier list is gonna have a lot of exciting stuff in it. We also have DLC items. That is Cocoon, Sickle, Serenade, Lightning Rod, thank you. Boom, just like that. According to the old list, we had S all the way down to Meme. S tier being something that, when we talk about win rate, it's an item that will definitely take you into that next level of win rate. And then you have F rank weapons, where you should probably sell it because chances are it's gonna cause you to get hit, and getting hit is not good. You may end up paying money to get that health back. And this was, you know, no controversy in this skill tier list. Even when it comes to YouTube comments, YouTube said only the highest reviews possible. 5 stars on this tier list. True story. You are in 4BC, so this tier list is from a 4BC perspective. It's assuming that you have all of the mutations unlocked, all of the skills unlocked, and it's also just from my perspective. So as you all are listening to the stuff I'm saying about the items, you are more than welcome to disagree. You're more than welcome to let me know in Twitch chat or in YouTube comments anything that I missed when it comes to talking about an item. It may be a detail that I don't even know. If you want to bring it in, you know, awesome to have it. Now we do have some meme categories down here. Meme stuff are items that are skills, but I can't really measure them because we don't use them. And that's gonna be this thingy right here. Pretty sure a lot of people in chat don't even know what this is, which, you know, maybe it's good that that's the case. What we do want to talk about is the first time on the list, the double crossbow. Previously a B tier. Now turrets are really kind of an interesting thing to talk about because for the most part, you would think to yourself that there's not really a bad turret, right? As long as the turret is hitting enemies, then what's the problem? And while that's true, some turrets do turret stuff better than other turrets. Some turrets do extra stuff that other turrets don't do. And Double Crossbow-matic is an example of a turret that only does one thing, and that's it hits enemies. Does it always hit enemies? No. There's a like area right above the turret where the turret only goes in like a V horizontal up to a V formation. So if you think about something like Conjunctivious, Double Crossbow-matic, even though it's really good at killing tentacles, just like any other turret would be, it's not the best at fighting stuff like Conjunctivious or bombers in some cases, Shantae for example. So usually I keep it in the B tier. I think it's good enough to win you the game. It hurts Hand of the King pretty well. But there's still some things I take over it. Powerful Grenade, I was putting in the C tier for 2 reasons. One is that when I'm playing survival, like a lot of stuff has happened since 1.9. A lot of stuff when it comes to fighting in biomes was killed by Telluric Shock. And Telluric Shock was great because at the time we were using Berserk mutation. And in biomes, I feel like that's really good. Better than Powerful Grenade. One thing that has become increasingly important when you're playing survival is the ability to get your arrows back when you're using a crossbow. So I would use this with something like repeater crossbow or something like the ice crossbow for a way to get my ammo back on a boss. Is that worthy to bring it up to a B tier? I would say it is, because I think there's some stuff that's gonna drop down into the situational tree. And now that we're on the latest patch where there's a lot of enemies that are kind of like BS to fight, not only the Oven Knights, but we have the new Malaise too. And when you have monsters spawning from the Malaise, you now need quick ways to just like dispatch everything, almost like a reset button. But Powerful Grenade doesn't really do a lot on bosses, so that is why we kind of don't put it in the A or the S tier. Alright, so next time on the list, Death Orb, previously a D tier. For the most part, the only time I think I'm using Death Orb is with Nutcracker. I don't use Death Orb with Scythe. I don't use Death Orb with Flawless. And you kind of could, like, assuming you got hit with Flawless, maybe you use the Death Orb after that, but I usually don't. If I'm using something like Repeater Crossbow, maybe I can, but I feel like the Repeater Crossbow would just kill everything anyway. Otherwise, I'm just playing ice builds with Ice Grenade, Ice Armor, or I'm using Wolf Trap, or I'm using Giant Whistle. A matter of fact, I feel like in most circumstances, I'd rather play Giant Whistle over Death Orb. And the reason why is that I can outpace Death Orb. So I am keeping that as a D. It still works. You know, definitely continue using Death Orb. I think it's actually really good. And 1 or 2 builds, but only for the boss fight. In a biome, I'd rather just hit everything myself. All right, next on the list, Sinew Slicer. Previously a B tier, Sinew Slicer got buffed because it was a bleeding item, and bleeding got that new thing where if it stacks 5 bleed, the monster pops. And that actually does pretty decent damage. Even in biomes, you can start placing this thing, and I feel like maybe that's better than double crossbow matic. The only issue is that on something like Conjunctivius, or against Shantae in the spoiler biome, or even against bombers, this doesn't hit things in the sky, it only does horizontal attacks. I think it does horizontal attacks better than this thing. There's the fact that it enables bleed damage on weapons. That is also true. So if you're playing tactics and you have a quick bow that does bonus damage to bleed, or something that I like to do is I'll have the owl when I'm not playing oily owl. You want an owl that does bonus to bleed. That way you can have really good synergy with a lot of the other tactics weapons. Next on the list, Infantry Grenade. Previously a D tier. Because, like, out of the other stuff, like, do I really want to use Infantry Grenade? I didn't. But in the latest update, version 1.9 maybe? No, version 2.0, maybe even 2.1. So there was a buff to Brutality mutations. Scheme specifically works really well with Infantry Grenade, where every time you use the Infantry Grenade, you get bonus damage on whatever your build is. At least Scheme works on both biomes and bosses, and it allows you to dual bind the Infantry Grenade onto your square button, so whenever you attack with a melee weapon, you're throwing out the grenade anyway, so you don't even have to think about it. I don't know if that's good enough to put into the into the B tier, because I think that is one very specific build, maybe the quad bind build, for those who remember that. I actually thought this was a really strong build. I thought it was amazing, but I want to say that's probably one of the only circumstances where the Infantry Grenade is like really part of the build itself. So we did give it a bit of a promotion, and I think that's good, because not everything is gonna get promoted. Some things get demoted. But that's one circumstance where you can start to think about, you know, maybe Infantry Grenade's not that bad. Next on the list, Tornado. Tornado, previously at F tier. I don't know what they can do. For those who don't know what Tornado does, it goes across the screen and then it comes back. And it's not the fastest thing on the planet. And when you're playing 4BC plus, a lot of enemies teleport. So even if you use the Tornado to knock enemies off the platform, they just teleport right back to you. But then you have things like the Lacerator, the monster that spins around. You have things like slashers, things like hammers. Hitting all of those with the Tornado might actually cause you to get hit later, because they charge up their spin, they charge up their teleport, they charge up their bats, all of that kind of stuff. It's dangerous to use it. One of the things that, because I always try to think about when we put something in F tier, what would make it actually good? Something like Spell Break, and the wind user can make tornadoes. And what you can do is you can combo the tornado with other elements. So you have like fire on the ground, you use the tornado, and that brings fire into the tornado and might spread fire. But that's not in the game. The only thing we do have in the game, like Shaman was saying, is Parting Gift. Tornado has the ability to knock away bombs. It knocks away bullets. So think about the Giant and Conjunctivious. It'll knock your own bombs coming from Parting Gift. Those are the ones that fall from enemies when they die, and it launches them to the next enemy. I don't know if it's worth the slot just because you're running Parting Gift. So yeah, Tornado, keep it in the F tier. F for life, feels bad. Next is the Heavy Turret. Previously an A tier. A tier because Heavy Turret does something that other turrets don't do, and that is it increases the damage you deal while you're near the turret. This is actually an affix. Like, you can roll for this on the other turrets, but the Heavy Turret gets that automatically. So the Heavy Turret actually does multiple things. Number one is it does damage. It hits enemies. They might die, they might not. Awesome, fantastic, we love damage. Number two is that it actually does a knockback with high breach. Oh, maybe it doesn't breach. It just has stuns enemy for 0.8 on each shot. Like, that's actually pretty good when you're playing tactics. Think about using things like the Fire Blast or Quick Bow, where all you needed was like half a second to deal the damage and the monster should die. Heavy Turret allows you to do that. But also, the third thing it does, it increases your damage. So all those items that I don't like, things like Magic Missile, things like Sonic Carbine, all of those do extra damage just because you're playing Heavy Turret, which is kind of decent. I actually think that's better than Double Crossbow Matic. Like, Double Crossbow sure is landing damage, but the fact that you're buffing all of your other damage, I think, is really underrated. And it even has like a little bit of a stun tied to it. So please use the Heavy Turret. It actually does really well in Conjunctivious, surprisingly. Cluster Grenade. Cluster, previously a D tier. Cluster, previously a D tier because it was red only. And when you're playing Brutality, I feel like Brutality has so many other grenades that do Cluster Grenade's job better, especially when it comes to wave clear. Like, I may as well just use Fire Grenade, because Fire Grenade also works on bosses really well. Oil Grenade. Oil Grenade is almost like a mini powerful, so why would I use Cluster when I could just use Oil? If you look at it, Cluster Grenade does 50 damage per bomb. So in order to beat on a single target the damage from an Oil Grenade, 2 actual clusters have to hit the same target. And if you know, you throw it and then it spreads out. It doesn't like throw all 6 out. Or like if you throw it, it then explodes in the sky and then rains down grenades. It explodes on target, then it spreads out. And chances are you're only gonna get maybe 2 grenades to hit the same target. If you can get 3, all of a sudden it does less than powerful grenades damage. You need 4 of these things to do the same damage as powerful grenade. And again, that's just from my opinion. Everyone who is playing this, definitely keep playing it. So there's not a lot of things that kill multiple targets in survival. So I would like to say that there is a survival build out there that uses Cluster Grenade. I think that's maybe better than Death Orb when it comes to wave clear. On bosses, the Death Orb is probably better, but in both circumstances, you're just using Giant Whistle instead. So it's like, I don't know if that's actually worth using. In the end, I don't think having this over Giant Whistle is really worth like putting really high up in the tiers. All right, next on the list, Knife Dance. Knife Dance, previously a C tier. A lot of my tactics builds, except for melee tactics, I don't really care to use Knife Dance. When you're using a bow, there's not a lot of builds that you would bring in Knife Dance, because the idea is you have to be on top of the monsters to use the Knife Dance. So why am I gonna want to do that with Marksman? Why would I do that with Quick Bow? Maybe I could do that with Nerves of Steel, because Nerves of Steel, you have to hold it. Monsters are probably on top of you at that point, so now you can pop this. This is still red-purple, so this did not get nerfed. It's still pretty decent. And now that we have the new Brutality mutations, initiative scheme, I think with Brutality, it's probably a lot better, especially now that we have the new bleeding stuff. The bleed pops and does extra damage. When you're playing tactics, however, they actually nerfed melee tactics a bit because they got rid of tactics invisibility. So the idea was that even though you're playing melee tactics, you can at least go invisible, get close, and then pop this on monsters that are kind of scary. Technically, you could still do that with things like the Smoke Bomb. Smoke Bomb gives you invisibility while you're playing tactics, but I'm not quite sure like how good that is. So I would say it's a C tier for tactics and a B tier for Brutality. Maybe like a little closer to an A. So I think I could average it out to being a B. Like how fast it triggers. Yeah, it's like in and of itself, it's actually a really good item. Like in a vacuum. Barnacle. A lot of people loved Barnacle back in the day. And then, you know, kind of fell out of love with it, which is fine. You know, it's me, it's not the game. When do you take Barnacle over any other turret? Against Conjunctivius? Because it like doesn't get killed by the tentacles? Like, does that matter? If a turret dies to a tentacle, turrets have like a 10-second cooldown at best. Spreads oil on a 10-second cooldown. So Barnacle has oil on hit, which is kind of nice. All the other turrets have like spreads oil around the turret, which is also on a 10-second cooldown and hits multiple things. It doesn't really hit things above it, which a lot of turrets don't. But when we think about like how many things an actual turret does, I feel like it doesn't do enough. Think about Heavy Turret. Heavy Turret that actually does 15% bonus damage while you're around it. Think about Sinew Slicer. Sinew Slicer does the bleeding pop. Think about Tesla. I don't want to spoil Tesla on the tier list. Tesla's pretty good. So it's like, when do you ever use Barnacle? In my opinion, you don't. I'd rather, I mean, yeah, you could call it a D because technically D is the placeholder spot, but I'm not gonna give it the pleasure of being a D. A matter of fact, we sometimes say this, we'll put stuff in the F tier because if the devs, you know, Motion Twin, Evil Empire. Oh, this VeeDotMe guy has this in the F tier? I don't know why, but maybe we should buff it. All right, next on the list, Magnetic Grenade. They introduced shock to the game, and now Magnetic Grenade does more damage than it used to. It does a surprising amount of damage. It also eats bombs. And back in the day, I was thinking to myself that, okay, eating bombs, like, do I ever really do that? And when you think about every biome, Arboretum, Toxic Sewers, Prison Depths, Stilt Village. Then you have Mama Tick. Hand of the King, obviously he has bombs, sucks those in. So I think against most things, it actually does a pretty decent job. They did nerf it because it used to be red-purple, now it's purple only. Does it eat distillery berry? And then a lot of people are talking about synergy with different things. Even Knife Dance. You can imagine that you throw the magnetic, it sucks the enemies in, you use Knife Dance, it kills them all. But in all honesty, a lot of times, Magnetic Grenade will just kill the monster anyway. And you don't really need to use the Knife Dance. I'm not sure if I'm willing to put it into an S, but I would say it's pretty dang close. Like a high A. Next on the list, Corrupted Power. C tier, right? Because Corrupted Power, when it comes to Susie out there. Susie. Poor Susie. Always asking me about dead cells and I can never give her like a straight answer. So Susie would ask us, if Corrupted Power drops, should I take it? And it's dependent on what you're using. It does not increase your damage by an X amount. It adds damage. Flint does a single attack that you can hold it down and it does a crit and like it looks pretty good. With Corrupted Power, it only gives you, let's say you did 1,000 damage with Flint and Corrupted Power adds 50. You're only adding 50 damage to your Flint's 1,000 damage. And that's nothing. You may as well just use something else. Not in exchange for 30% damage taken. So when do you use Corrupted Power? You use it for something that has high attack speed. So say Magic Missile, Quick Bow, Frantic Sword, Hayabusa Gauntlets, Blood Sword, and stuff like that. It's actually better than a D, but what I will say is that as a C rank item, you have to know what builds it works well with. All right, next on the list, Flamethrower. We finally found a new S rank item. Tesla Coil and Flamethrower damage has been reduced. I don't know by how much though. What I can say is that Flamethrower, in my opinion, is still one of the best turrets in the game. It does really well against every boss except maybe Conjunct. Only because it can't angle upwards like Tesla Coil can. Is there a world where you always take Tesla Coil over Flamethrower? Or does that make Tesla Coil a triple S? I think we leave this as an S, and then we'll have to figure out what happens later in the list. All right, let's keep it going. Stun Grenade, previously a D tier. And we had this in the D tier because there's specific enemies that don't get stunned. Examples of enemies that don't get stunned are the skeletons that are in caverns, the ones that do the pogo stick. Slammers, the blue birds, cannot be stunned. Hand of the King cannot be stunned, which is by far like the most important monster to be stunned. You can't use this tactics anymore. With tactics, it actually wasn't that bad because when you're using something like Quick Bow, you would throw the stun grenade and then you start just plugging away with a Quick Bow. But technically, Stun Grenade doesn't do damage anyway, so the fact that it scales off green doesn't really matter. It just does the same thing no matter what. So in that regard, just like Ice Grenade, just like Ice Armor, you can use Stun Grenades off color, and it doesn't really matter. But would we rather use Ice Grenade? Probably. Off color. Would I rather use Ice Armor off color? Probably. So we're gonna keep it as a D, and we're gonna find those things that do Stun Grenade's job better. Oh. All right, next on the list, True Blood. Where's my True Blood viewers at? Suki, thank you, Plunger. Wow, I was about to say there's no way it's Susie Stackhouse. But then again, when we're talking about Dead Cells, maybe the Vamp is Susie Stackhouse coming through. So Vampirism, previously in the meme tier. That's... I don't know if I'm willing to make that a meme. We had Vamp in the meme tier because the idea was that when Vamp works, it's awesome. Just like Curse Sword. When Vamp and Curse Sword works, it's awesome. When Vamp and Curse Sword don't work, you may have actually lost the run. But in all honesty, I don't know if I care to measure it as a meme, only because I feel like I'm not really trying to analyze the weapon. So let's think about it this way. On what items does Vamp actually work? It works on items that do very chunky damage. The lower the damage dealt, the less amount of health you'll recover. So this thing works on stuff like the crit from Broadsword, Giant Killer, Scythe. Would I say that you use this with recovery? Absolutely not. If you do that, then you basically lost a mutation. So this is really something that you might leave on the map until you get hit, and then you take it and you try to use it. And if it works, then great. You got like half your health back. And that's it, because you probably can't go higher than that. But if you fail, you are net 0. And maybe you have to use the health pot anyway. Really, what I'm getting at is I don't want you all to not use the health pot, like if you had the chance. If you're playing Brutality, you have Tainted Flask. Every time you get an X amount of elite kills, you get the health pot back. And remember, you can buy health pots too, assuming that you are actually clearing the biomes. So in that case, again, Susie Stackhouse asking us, does she drink True Blood? Just drink the health pot. If you're playing Brutality, go Tainted Flask if you get really low. If you're playing Survival, you have Gastro, and you don't even need to play Survival to use Gastro. If the devs are out there, we want devs to consider buffing stuff. Maybe they don't buff it if it's in the meme tier. If it's in the meme tier, then it's like, oh, they're using it. They just use it every once in a while for certain cool things. And the cool things must be busted. That's why it's a meme. No, we want the devs to know, I'm not using this thing at all. I'm selling it. I'd rather just use a health pot. S tier Cleaver. Wow. I considered Cleaver one of the absolute best turrets in the game. The reason why I took it over Sinew Slicer is because it doesn't get destroyed. It actually hits slightly above it. So against stuff like the Giant, it actually hits the fists, for those who don't know. And he can't punch it either. So that makes it better than Sinew Slicer, in my opinion. And then I do like it better than Heavy Turret because it grinds up monsters pretty quickly compared to doing the one single shot. And then the bonus damage that you're thinking about getting, because you're popping the bleed, that pop is probably about as much as the 15% you were getting. All right, next on the list, Ice Grenade. Ice Grenade, previously a C tier. C because I was honestly only using Ice Grenade with the Scythe and Nutcracker, and that's it. But with Heart of Ice, for those who don't know, Heart of Ice gives you cooldown reduction for hitting a frozen target. So Ice Grenade does a little bit of damage, kills bats. A lot of times, whenever I play Survival, and it's a weapon that won't kill bats, I take Ice Grenade. And that does really well on flying enemies. But a matter of fact, Ice Grenade is a survival only weapon. I am actually taking Ice Grenade in almost every single survival build. Like, looking at the list down here, I'm not sure if there's a survival build in here that doesn't use Ice Grenade to some degree. And I think it's because Ice Grenade is maybe best in class when it comes to crowd control. Even think about Wolf Trap. Wolf Trap's really good because there's 2 of them. The monster stays snared. It doesn't hit things above it. And Ice Grenade fills that void. And maybe you run Ice Grenade with Wolf Trap when you're doing something like the Nutcracker or the Flint. Yeah, so in all honesty, I think I value this really highly. Almost better than Powerful. Like, in most circumstances, if I was playing Survival and I had Giant Whistle already, I would probably take Ice Grenade over Powerful Grenade. even in the scenario where, like, let's say cavern. No, not caverns. Graveyard. This is a great example. Graveyard has rats. It has inquisitors. It has not slashers. It has cannibals. It does have slashers. Wait, Graveyard is an awful map. Ice Grenade solves all of that. It kills all of the small stuff. All of the big and medium stuff stays alive. And then you actually get to hit the monsters normally. The only thing that Ice Grenade can't do is kill bosses. Pretty much every boss. It's there for your biome clear. So I'm not willing to put it in the S tier because you want something else for your bosses. But I think I'm willing to keep it as an A. Next on the list, Tonic. Tonic previously an S tier. This thing has damage reduction. When you press L2, it gives you more damage reduction. This thing has a bubble. This thing gives you blue health. And the way how we used to do it was we used to run this with cooldown reduction so you can spam it. The cooldown reduction only works after the 10 seconds of whatever the activation is. So technically, that's not an S anymore. This is actually usable in Brutality when you're playing Swift Sword. This gives you a move speed bonus. It allows you to activate the Swift Sword crits, which is really fun, but it's not as broken as it used to be. Keeping it going, Wolf Trap. S tier weapon. 2 traps, roots the enemy, increasing damage they take by X% every 5 seconds. So you're actually doing bonus damage for using Wolf Trap. The way how you want to play this is you want to go to Concierge or Conjunctivious. After that, you want to go to typically Timekeeper. So out of that, only Hand of the King is really kind of like resistant to the Wolf Trap, but does work overall against them. Typically, the builds that you're rocking a Wolf Trap, you don't really need to use Wolf Trap in the biome. Hopefully, you're running this with Cluster or with Ice Grenade. Or if you're playing Tactics, you're using Wolf Trap with the Owl. And stuff like that. Fire Grenade, Brutality only. Previously a B tier. Throws a grenade that does damage, catches the enemy on fire, and then there's fire on the ground. So what's really good is that you have, after the fire grenade goes off, it's still doing damage afterward. So I honestly think that's better than Powerful Grenade. Of course, Powerful Grenade is also survival, but this is Brutality only. But when you're playing red, I think it actually is more useful than this or this, and in some cases, even the Knife Dance, because Knife Dance, you have to be on top of the monster. Fire Grenade, you don't. You could actually use both of these together. With some cooldown reduction, Chef's Kiss in the Brutality tree. The only time I don't use Fire Grenade is if I'm using Flamethrower, because I feel like you don't want to overload the amount of fire. This stacks a lot of fire on its own. If I'm not using Flamethrower, I just take the Fire Grenade almost every time. Like, there's turrets up here that I might find better than a Fire Grenade, but Fire Grenade is almost never the wrong choice. Only thing, it doesn't hit our demons, and that's it. Next, Grapple Hook. I used to really hate Grapple Hook. Like, I thought it was kind of like overkill. Like, in what circumstance do you really need to use Grapple Hook? And then once the viewer submission started, Twitch chat started to give me Grapple Hook builds that were actually pretty decent. I think my issue was I was taking Grapple Hook really early in the game, and I was confused because it wasn't really killing anything. And that's because the percent of bonus damage it deals goes up over the course of the game. And it goes up to like some freaking ridiculous numbers, like 10 times damage taken. For those who don't know, the way Grapple Hook used to work is you used to hook in the enemy, smack it, it gets stunned. They changed it so that the hook itself does the stun for 1 second. And that's like completely different, because you used to have like slashers, for example, where you hook them and then they just start charging their attacks. Or knife throwers, you hook them in and they jump backwards. Now you can just hook it and kill it. And that's like actually incredible. I think it's better than even Corrupted Power at doing like additional damage. And now we have Scheme while you're playing red, and Scheme does damage every time you do the grapple. And it turns into like nasty damage. I don't know if I have a vid of that, but now that we have Scheme, I'm gonna go to Mama Tick and let's see what happens. Now look at that. Look at the chunkster. This is grapple plus Scheme, and I have Wormettes in here, I guess. That's a hit. And this thing is only like a 4-second cooldown. So we grapple again, roll in, pop. And that's the power of grapple. I don't even know if the Scheme is doing that much. So I actually think if I were to compare these two together, grapple probably does more damage than Corrupted Power over the course of the game. Corrupted Power is good if maybe you have the owl and other stuff that's like constantly dealing damage. But if you're playing Brutality, I think you take Grapple Hook all day. I'm just not gonna put it in the A tier only because if I have a bleed focused build, maybe you don't go this. Something like Blood Sword might need the other bleed pieces. So B sounds pretty good in that regard. All right, next on the list, the Crushinator. Crusher, previously an A tier. Like most of the time I use this thing is as survival. Take for example, Broadsword, Nutcracker. And matter of fact, my favorite build with Nutcracker is Wolf Trap. Honestly, any Heart of Ice build is just Nutcracker with this thing, the Wolf Trap plus Crusher. Crusher, unfortunately, doesn't work on the Giant, so you do need to go either Timekeeper or Scarecrow. This would like replace your Giant Whistle. In a build where you don't need cooldown reduction, I would rock Scythe with something like Ice Grenade plus Crusher, or Ice Armor and Crusher, or even Cocoon plus Crusher. And then Tactics, same thing that you would do with Cleaver. You just have a bow, put this down, let it slow the enemies as you're plugging away. Very good, very A-worthy. I just wouldn't call it an S because I think there's some other stuff that could do that better as Tactics. Root Grenade I actually had in the F tier. Okay. Whenever I need Root Grenade, I'm probably playing Ice Grenade instead. Do I need Root Grenade's damage? I don't think so. Like, we're dealing damage with our... This thing's green only. Do I think it's better than Stun? I kinda do in some regard, but I think I like Cluster better than this. Phaser. Actually, if someone were to put together all the viewer builds to see what has been recommended the most, I would say Phaser is by far the most popular skill. Why that is, I have no idea. Is it good? Absolutely. But I thought Susie didn't really care for Phaser. I thought that when we were talking to Susie, recommending like how to get through the game, Phaser was a way to die. But maybe that's not true. Maybe, you know, Susie has a couple more 100 hours in Dead Cells now compared to the last tier list, and now all of a sudden Phaser is like super good. So then the question is, when is Phaser not good? And as I was talking about with Grapple Hook, Scheme is actually really good, and the quad bind build was one that had Scheme plus Phaser. Phaser does some very unique things that we're going to talk about in just a second. We want to check out the damage first though. Quad bind, Scheme, and we have cooldown reduction in the kit. So we have the bonus damage. I think this is the Scheme, and I'm pretty sure Phaser is the first hit. All right. I don't know if that's the same damage or not. I think this is an S rank item. I think it's a little better than Grapple. I think for the weapons that you use this with, it always does its job. But the main thing that I want to point out was against Hand of the King and Spoiler Boss, this is a really good weapon. In some circumstances, you can go into Spoiler Boss find this item on the floor or find it in the transition area, and all of a sudden the spoiler is 10 times easier to fight because you're running phaser. I'm not gonna spoil like what it does in that regard, but definitely give it a try if you're kind of familiar with how the spoiler boss fight is. And then against all the other enemies in the game, we're talking demons, we're talking slashers, we're talking cannibal. This thing destroys cannibal. The only thing this struggles with is like the hammer that spawns. Really anything that spawns anything. That's where phaser kind of struggles. But technically, if you phase in on one of the bats, you don't have to hit the bat to get the phaser proc. You can hit anything and you'll deal bonus damage, so long as you phase something. And lastly, this activates melee mutations. So if you're using open wounds, run phaser. If you're using scheme, run phaser. If you're using melee mutation that slows enemies on hit, run phaser. So next on the list, explosive decoy. Explosive decoy previously in the F tier. So in 4BC, monsters teleport to you, and a lot of monsters aggro you from across the screen. Say things like the Inquisitor, things like Bombardiers. Like if they see you, they automatically start aiming at you. And explosive decoy does nothing for that. In some cases, monsters teleport to you even though you place the decoy somewhere else. They don't attack you. So you're immune to damage, but you're actually getting ran down by monsters. If you drop to the next platform, they might teleport to you, but if you stay on the first one, they go for the decoy. B, decoy is on a 20-second cooldown. To reduce the cooldown of that isn't all that great. C, bosses don't care about invisibility, so take something like Timekeeper. If you drop the decoy, you have to bait her into attacking it, or fight on top of it, so it explodes like over time. Oh, number 4 is that we have Stealth Grenade. So if I'm taking it for like the invisibility, why would I not use Smoke Bomb? It does that better. And when you exit Smoke Bomb, even though I think it's broken right now, when you exit Smoke Bomb, your first attack does a huge hit, almost as much as Grapple Hook does. So I actually am going to keep this as an F, because I think there's a lot of things that are wrong with it in 4BC+. Like in lower BCs, it is definitely usable. Oh, we also have Lightning Rod too. I almost think Lightning Rod is a better explosive decoy. Next, we have Oil Grenade. Oil Grenade, previously in A. I actually really like this thing. I like it better than Powerful Grenade. So this thing does, what, half? Yeah, it does half a Powerful Grenade's damage on a slightly shorter cooldown, but it puts oil everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean everywhere. Like above you, below you, on monsters, it's really crazy. Of course, you can use it with certain builds. You can use it with Fire Blast, Pyrotechnics. You can use it with Ice Shards. A lot of different things like oil, and that's great. But the idea that it actually kills monsters is pretty good. And I think as red, it's better than Cluster. Of course, if I was playing green, you definitely take Powerful Grenade over oil, but as red, with all the different builds that are viable as red that want oil, so use that Oil Grenade. Better than situational, I would say. All right, next on the list, we have Corrosive Cloud, another F tier weapon. And this one like always gets a little bit of heat, because I do know some people in chat like Corrosive Cloud, and I'm sure it's like fun. One, it applies only 1 bleed and only 1 poison stack. Those stacks do decent damage, but when you think about, oh, V, you're supposed to use this with bleeding builds, you get the pop, it's awesome stuff. It only applies 1 bleed. It does give you damage reduction, which is kind of cool. I think it's better than this stuff down here. It also gives you like electricity around you, but overall, I don't think it's like super good. I'd rather you all play other stuff. At least it gives you damage reduction, which is definitely a thing. Emergency door, previously a C tier item. When you think about the E door, it's probably like the most situational item in the entire game. Like, it's made to activate one weapon. Otherwise, it is just covers the ground with oil that burns and damage reduction. So I can't make it any higher than a C because, yes, you can use it with any build, but you should honestly use something else if you're not using the crowbar. It is kind of like a point and click stun. It's almost like a stun grenade when you're playing tactics, and also does burning oil, and that's better than stun grenade. But I think I'd rather have you all use a turret. As tactics, I would almost rather use this over Corrosive Cloud. It does more things than Corrosive Cloud does. Next on the list, the last grenade, Swarm Grenade. Swarm Grenade got reworked, so that is now tactics only, and using one grenade uses all 8 worms. So you only have to press the grenade one time for the worms to come out. So the issues with the worms is that they have no health. I don't remember if it was Scarecrow or if it was a different boss, where I used the wormettes on the boss, and every single attack the boss did killed them. They just have no health. Bosses just rip through them. And in that case, all I had was the Ranger's gear. Oh, what about this? What about this? What if the wormette just remove the concept that you have multiple worms? Like, that 1 HP worm does nothing against Scarecrow, Hand the King, etc. Instead, have it to where you throw the grenade and you get one giant worm, like the size of the worm elite, and it's this. And then every time the worm dies, it splits into more wormettes. Motion, you better be writing this down. Chat, I want to see 10 Reddit posts with this suggestion on a rework. So the worm dies, explodes into 2 more worms. And then when those die, they explode into 4 worms. 2 worms each. And then after that, they all die. I don't know if you need to increase the cooldown from the 10 seconds or not, but if they only have 1 HP, then they should be like a little, not tankier, but they want to exist longer. So that's an F rank item, needs a buff. Next list, Lacerating Aura. As a red-purple item, there are some tactics builds that we weren't using the Lacerator with. But now there's a couple of new tactics weapons that are absolutely fantastic with Lacerating Aura, and that's Snake Fang. Snake Fang is probably the best tactics weapon for melee right now, in my opinion. And I think you always take Lacerator with Snake Fang. Brutality, most of the stuff is close range anyway. You just use this with pretty much every close range build when you're playing playing Brutality. The only build I probably wouldn't use this with is, again, something like Flint. But even Flint, the fact that it has cooldown reduction because it crits, it's actually not that bad. And if you think about it, because you're charging up the slam, you're grinding up the enemy at the same time, probably good. Tesla Coil. Oh no. We have not measured yet, because the last list we did it before Distillery was introduced. Would you take Tesla over Sinew Slicer? Absolutely. Tesla Coil hits 360 degrees around it, and it has a dot. Heavy Turret has a little bit of like stun to it, so like every hit is a 0.8 stun, and it increases your damage. Tesla Coil does shock. So shock, if you have other things that do damage to shock, get bonus damage. It's 60%, I believe. And it hits 360 degrees. So that's pretty good. Barnacle blows Barnacle out of the water. Barnacle is supposed to be that item that hits everything. We don't do that anymore. We do Tesla. When do you not take the Tesla? When you don't drive the Tesla. If there's a Tesla parked in your parking lot right now, and Elon Musk himself was dangling the keys in your face, you're telling me you wouldn't take that? A tier dedicated to the devs nerfing it. Tesla coil damage has been reduced, and it's still good. I think that's called triple S. And if I get hate mail for that, you know what? Not a big deal. Wave of Denial, only a 5-second cooldown. So as long as you're running some kind of reduction, you're gonna be able to get a lot of use out of this. When you're fighting Conjunctivius and Mamatic, you have Wave Denial, does really good in those fights. It interrupts the attacks, knocks the stuff backwards. You're fighting Timekeeper or the Giant, this will knock away Shuriken and falling crystals. And then against the Hand of the King, knocks away bombs. I think Magnetic Grenade actually does Wave Denial's job better right now. And it applies the shock. I'd rather you take Magnetic plus Flamethrower or Magnetic plus Cleaver instead of Wave. But this does really well until the Magnetic shows up. Wings of the Crow. Previously, oh baby. S rank? How in the world? After the buff, we weren't really sure, like, is this actually good? And we tried a couple times. I think the builds are pretty decent. Back in the day, we only had a couple weapons that we used it with. We used it with Electric Whip. We used it with Magic Missile. We used it with Kunai. We had to build with Quick Bow. And that was actually pretty good because if you think about Quick Bow, as you're firing the first shot, it does no damage. But when you have Wings of the Crow, you can actually kill an enemy sometimes in one shot because the Wings of the Crow gives damage to the Quick Bow. But what it also does is if you're on the ground with Wings of the Crow, it enhances your attack. And then all of a sudden, Lantern came into the mix. And we had Lantern with Wings of the Crow. And we found out that you can float over monsters, activate your Lantern, and kill any boss. Some people also use Wings of the Crow for speed running and just skip bosses entirely. And I don't really like to measure stuff on the tier list for things that I don't know if it's intended gameplay or not. If you're running this thing, probably run Masochist. Especially if you go to High Peak Castle. There's so many times I've used Wings of the Crow, dashed into a spike ball, and almost died. But you're playing Tactics, so you should probably be running Masochist anyway. Next on the list, Owlette, Owlivia, Alejandro, Oliver. I don't know any other owl names, but this, historically a S rank. This is like Corrupted Power, except better, because the owl itself does its own damage. You can enrage the owl so that it does even more damage. The owl doesn't miss. The only time the owl miss is when it can't shoot through a wall. But every boss, Conjunctivius, Timekeeper, the owl used to eat the giant for dinner, and then they buffed the giant, and now it's only like a light brunch. And that's when you play Protect the Owl. You want to basically use things like the Crusher, the Ice Bow, even Emergency Door, Wolf Trap, all stuff to let the owl do its job. And if you do, it's awesome. If you have owl with like Frantic Sword plus Knife Dance, I think that's where you get into trouble. Now you're not playing an owl build, you're playing a Frantic Sword build with Knife Dance and an owl that happens to kill bats. So I would say owl, S rank item, but you have to make sure, so that means a little bit of brain usage, you have to make sure you're using it in the right context. Light Speed, aka Shadow the Hedgehog if you're playing Brutality, aka Blaze the Cat if you're playing Tactics. I do have a newfound appreciation for it because we had a few builds where the light speed is like an execute almost. This is like the perfect example. Prison Depths, you have a hallway, you have a slasher, you have a hammer, you got the quick bow, you're loading in bullets, They rush over to you because it's prison depths and the game is awful. And you haven't killed it yet. So what you do is you activate the light speed, you dash through, and then hopefully you pop all the enemies. If you don't, it's a little unfortunate, but I think that is gameplay that is a little better than F. Okay, Giant Whistle, previously an A tier. If you were here for the rest of the stream, you would hear whenever I was talking about a survival weapon, Giant Whistle was the measurement. Like, why would I use this over Giant Whistle? Why would I use Death Orb in a world that Giant Whistle exists? Why would I use Powerful Grenade over Giant Whistle? The reason why is you want to clear biomes, but maybe like this isn't the best at clearing a biome. So that's a D and that's a B. So what do we kill bosses with? What do we kill elites with? Some survival builds, because again, this is a survival only weapon. Some survival builds don't need a skill to kill elites. If you're playing survival and you're struggling on a boss, I think the chances are you're probably using like lower tier survival weapon anyway. Say like broadsword or ice crossbow. But I know it is very good. It does a perfectly good job on bosses. I wouldn't call it like you did that and you instantly won the game. Moving on, we got Telluric Shock. Telluric Shock B, because I actually valued it over Powerful Grenade, because the way we used to use this was that we would use Melee Mutation, Killer Instinct, and Berserk. And you could almost like hop through the biome with Telluric Shock. Like you kill one enemy, Killer Instinct would activate, your Telluric Shock would go down by half, fight the next one, kill it, then you bunny hop to the next one. And like that's the whole game. They nerfed it though, so you now no longer get cooldown reduction when you kill stuff with Telluric Shock. So I think that's worthy of a downgrade. It still kills stuff. I'd say it's pretty similar to Cluster. All right, Smoke Bomb. Smoke Bomb, previously on the tier list, B rank item. So assuming that Smoke Bomb works, I actually think that Smoke Bomb damage dealt is really high, but it's another item, almost like this thing, the door, where you have to know the build to use it in. So for example, Smoke Bomb with Quick Bow, not that great. Smoke Bomb with this thing, Snake Fang, actually kind of hot. So I think it's very situational. There's also some bosses that this works very well against. I was telling you all that bosses don't care about invisibility. Against Mama Tick, when she holds up her attack, a really good way to counter that is jump on top of her and toss down a Smoke Bomb. That does a miniature knockback. She actually gets interrupted and you get bonus damage. So in that regard, I think it's actually really good if you kind of know some stuff about the game. So take Susie, for example. I don't know if Susie knows that stuff. Mushroom Boy, previously a B tier. Mushroom Boy is survival only, and it doesn't work with every survival build. Take, for example, Heavy Crossbow. You rake the monster in, you pump the shotgun, have it in your sights, you're aiming down sights, ADS, Mushroom Boy knocks it away. It's like awful. So when it comes to range survival, the only thing that's left are two-handed things. And the only thing that I would use Mushroom Boy with is Explosive Crossbow. And in some cases, we blow up the Mushroom Boy every time, and then we are running Instincto, that's the cooldown reduction, or even maybe Heart of Ice, so that way you get your Mushroom Boy back. And I think that's probably a decent build, but if you just let the Mushroom Boy do whatever it wants, I don't know if it's like gonna get you dubs. I don't know if I'm willing to give this points just for skipping Mama Tick, because like this thing versus other bosses, not that great. Ice Armor, previously an A rank weapon. A rank because just like Ice Grenade, it actually works in every color that you need that kind of thing. An example of off-color Ice Armor is you're playing Glass Cannon Tactics. Quad damage Ice Shard, double damage Electric Whip. You would replace the Lacerator with the Ice Armor. And it's almost like a protect the owl, but it's more like protect my health. Like, please, for the love of all things holy, don't let me lose my health right here. Outside of glass cannon tactics, I use ice armor on any build in survival where the weapon itself carries you through everything. So for example, that is heavy crossbow, scythe, iron staff, flawless. All I need is a way to set up my first attack, and ice is the way to do that. Next on the list though, we got DLC. Fatal Falls, $5 weapons in here. Who has their $5 ready? Sickle has something that survival doesn't, and it's continuous mobile damage. That's what Death Orb is supposed to be. Death Orb, you throw it down the hallway, deals damage continuously in a line. Sickle does that too, but it follows the player. So you can do it in one hallway, you jump up, and you do it above you. Also, Sickle hits things above you and below you. So you may have had a monster that you haven't aggroed yet, and Sickle hits that. And that's better than Death Orb. It is a tactics weapon. Comparing it to Wave Denial and Knife Dance, I feel like Knife Dance has some instances where it is better than Sickle. Giant Whistle kills elites and Sickle does not. Sickle is just for clearing biomes and dealing damage on bosses. And I think that long term might be better than Giant Whistle. Lacerating Aura is better than Sickle when you're playing tactics. So like averaging these out, I would say this is a low A and a high B. I'm gonna keep it as a B. I think it's good. I don't think it's game breaking. Serenade. Serenade got released with a massive bug. A bug where I don't play bugged runs in Dead Cells, but this one was a little special and I kind of had to do it. I even tried to give it its own like cool looking little thumbnail. It just lets you spam skills. But of course, we're not gonna measure it on the bug. If we were to measure it on exactly what it does, it is a brutality skill that attacks by itself, applies oil at range. You can swap to the melee build, inflict a crit, so cooldown reduction works, and we know brutality loves cooldown reduction. And then swap back and inflict more crits. It works in brutality with scheme as well, so every time you swap Serenade, you get a scheme proc. And I think that by itself is probably C tier worthy. Like that's a C tier build, I think, is Serenade with scheme. So when does Serenade pop off? It pops off if you have an oil required build that's red. So say Pyro, say Fire Blast, Fire Grenade, Flamethrower, all that stuff I think works really well with Serenade. So that's enough to bump it into the B tier. You can use it with builds that have ammo. So say Infantry Bow, Hemorrhage, all builds where you're like throwing your actual weapons, you run out of ammo, you swap to Serenade Melee, and you attack the enemy normally until you get your ammo back. And I think that's kinda decent. I don't know how much damage this thing truly does on like Hand of the King. I just think that almost like a Hokuto bow perspective, it's probably a semi-Hokuto bow as a skill. And I think from that aspect, it's probably pretty good. Is it as good as Owl though? I think because this thing requires brain usage, maybe it's not as good as Owl, or maybe you're a god at the game, I don't know. I think it's probably, matter of fact, there's probably people out there who can use Serenade to an S tier level. Like they have the timing so perfect that they can throw hemorrhage axes, stack exactly the right amount of Serenade stacks, swap, get the crits, swap back, use the rest of their ammo, and it's probably like incredibly good looking. Decoy. We have played this thing before. We have taken it to every boss. For those who don't know, the way how Cocoon works, when you do the block properly, it gives you a parry. And that parry is actually massive. It parries slammers doing their peck. it parries bombers doing their down slam. It's a little inconsistent, but it does it. It knocks back bombs. So in that regard, it does. I mean, there's nothing in the game that does that, right? Wave denial as tactics. Is it better than wave denial? Yes. It actually has a wave denial built into it. Kinda. What it does is if you miss the timing on the cocoon, it actually knockbacks and stuns all enemies that weren't parried. What was scary was that you had a bunch of enemies on top of you. You saw the slasher like coming down with his sword. If you do the cocoon on just that, every other enemy around you still gets stunned. And I think that is a lot better than wave denial. Because it's a parry, it actually works with parry mutations. So Blind Faith, oh, we were even using it with What Doesn't Kill Me. I actually have a newfound love for What Doesn't Kill Me because of stuff like this and Iron Staff. And I know you all are thinking like, ooh, I'm not that good at parries. Do I really want to pay $5 and I'm not even like parrying regularly? It's actually even better than a regular parry because the timing is really, really forgiving. You use it early, you use it late. If you use it too late, the monster gets stunned. If you use it too early, the game often gives you it anyway. The only thing it cannot do is multi-parry. So say something like the knife thrower that does like the multiple kunai at you, it cannot parry all of them. It only parries the first one. So typically the way how I do it, I'll do cocoon on the first bullet, I'll roll through the others, and that usually works. Against stuff like the giant, I cocoon the first bullet from the giant, and then I usually dodge the second one and cocoon the third one. I know that's some brain usage, but I actually think if you can just use it ever so often, it works wonders. It's a different gameplay, it's patience, and you all know me. I am not patient. I will be the first person. Susie's behind me begging me, V, don't jump in. I jump in and I die. All I had to do was wait to do the cocoon, and that would have been it. So yeah, S rank item. I actually dig it a lot. I just didn't find the video to show you all. And then the last thing on the tier list, the last tier list ever, maybe not. Lightning Rod is, again, another very unique weapon. Not a lot of items do what this does. I think the closest thing to Lightning Rod is probably Serenade, Sickle. I thought Lightning Rod was just a lightning decoy, where you place it down, you walk away, place another one, and 2 sets of monsters die. But then we found out that no matter where you place the lightning rods, the way it really works is that one lightning strike comes down on the first one, and then there's a line to your second lightning rod in an L shape or a check mark or any direction. It doesn't really matter. In fact, people have gone so far as to place one rod down, use a teleporter, teleport backwards so monsters are on your first rod, place the rod down, and then they all get struck. Other things we've done, take Stilt Village for example. Stilt Village has those towers. You go to the bottom of the tower, you place your first rod, and then you run up the tower, you place a second rod. And everything in that line gets struck. And I think that's something that's very unique. It's dangerous, but I think there's real gameplay there. If the monsters don't die to the lightning strike, they get shocked. And if you have something like Hokuto Bow, you can activate the dot on the shock and eventually kill them without ever having to mess with them. Do I think as a shock weapon, it's better than Tesla Coil? Absolutely not. Like, I go into any boss, we're using Tesla Coil. We're not thinking about Lightning Rod. I think it's actually worse than Sinew Slicer on bosses. I don't know if I'm willing to put it in an A tier because when it comes to, you know, Susie again, this is me convincing Susie, hey Susie, did you see me do this like set gameplay? It's busted, right? There's no way that's bad. Someone in chat might say, V, I tried what you showed us. I died instantly. Like, I set the first bomb. I was in ossuary. I set the first bomb. I ran to the second area. I dropped it, and it was a slasher, and the slasher killed me. And I am so sorry if that happens to you. So I'm gonna have this as a B tier for now. And I don't want to say that the DLC is not worth it. It's definitely fun gameplay that we have never had before. So I don't know, chat. I think this is basically where it stands. We have some promotions. We have some demotions. We have things that didn't move at all. I know there's a lot of items in the A rank. We have talked about that before, where you know what, A rank, maybe that's a good thing. That means there's a lot of good items right now in Dead Cells. And if we can have everything in the A, you know what, that's great. If we don't, then devs, you know what to do. But if the devs do somehow watch this and find something for the D and F ranks, that's awesome. To make them C or higher. What would I rather see Vamp do? If I were to see Vamp buffed, it would need to do something when I use it at higher health values. I could use it at 100%. And if I can only heal 50% of my health, I need a reason to do that. Maybe like every 1,000 health that you lost for Vamp, your next X attacks deal additional damage. Because you want the player to actually work to get their health back, right? You don't want it to just be like you use it on cooldown. But if you give the player too much damage, they just get all your health back anyway. Any game with more A tier items, the better the game is. I would agree with that. And again, I'm not gonna post this on Reddit. I'm not gonna post this in the Discord for Dead Cells. If I do that, we're gonna get freaking karma'd out the wazoo. Bad karma. Downvotes. This is for our own personal use, unfortunately. So again, the fact that you all might not agree with all the tier lists, that's fine for me. Because if you come in and tell me stuff about the tier list, that's great. That's the back and forth. That's the community aspect that we want to see. Maybe it's even, you know, a little seed in the viewer's mind. We planted it. We're saying, hey, chat, Barnacle is an F. What do you think? I'm drawing out feedback from you. I'm playing that seed. You may not have thought to type earlier, but as soon as you saw I disrespected the Barnacle, now you came in to talk about it. And that's what we want to see. If you're in YouTube comments, if you are in YouTube comments and you're seeing this video, let me know in the comments. Tell me every single item that I did wrong, every single thing I did right. Give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe too while you're at it.